Here's your share, Mom. My son's voice was firm, clipped, as if he were handing me a gift. But in front of me was not a ribbon-wrapped present, not a gleaming check, but a crumpled canvas bag, a faint metallic smell wafting from inside. I slowly opened it. Loose coins and a few crumpled bills lay haphazardly, clinking softly as my hand touched them. The sound echoed in the empty kitchen like a mocking laugh. I looked at my son, then at my daughter-in-law. Both stood with arms crossed, their expressions calm, as if this were perfectly reasonable. I took a deep breath. My share, for a $1 million apartment, is just this. My daughter-in-law shrugged slightly, lips curling into a faint smile. You know we had to use most of the money to secure our future. This is what's left. And you don't really need much to live simply. I stayed silent. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because my throat had tightened. At that moment, I knew one thing. The apartment I had spent my life saving for, the place I thought would be my safe haven in old age, was no longer mine. You have to understand, I am not a rash person. I've lived more than 60 years in America, working 2, sometimes 3 shifts a day ever since I left Vietnam with nothing but my bare hands. I'm not rich, but I know how to save money, and I understand the value of having a roof over my head. That apartment I bought after nearly 30 years of saving. It wasn't a luxurious villa, but it was in a safe neighborhood, near a park and a supermarket, comfortable enough for me to live in, and to welcome my children and grandchildren on weekends. The day I signed the power of attorney to sell it, I told myself, this is for my son's future. He said he would invest in starting a company that he would let me share in the monthly profits, and that he would take care of me for the rest of my life. I believed him. Not because the promise was tempting, but because he was my son, the boy I had carried, fed, and worried over when he was still in high school. But before the day that bag of money appeared, it all began on what seemed like an ordinary evening. My son and daughter-in-law came over bringing cake and a bottle of wine. They said they wanted a serious talk about the family. My son began, "Mom, I know you've worked hard your whole life. Now you should rest. We have a business opportunity, but we need capital. If you sell your apartment, you can live with us, save money, and let me invest so it will grow." My daughter-in-law chimed in, her voice soft, her eyes full of apparent concern. "You won't have to worry about bills or fixing the house. We'll take care of everything. You just enjoy life." It sounded reasonable. I'd lived in the U.S. long enough to know that here adult children usually live apart, and elderly parents either stay in nursing homes or move in with their children if needed. The idea of living with them, even though I preferred my independence, wasn't too bad if it meant stronger family bonds. That night I tossed and turned. Numbers swirled in my head, nearly $1 million from the apartment plus my modest savings. If my son was telling the truth, it could be enough for all of us to live comfortably. And if he failed, I'd have no home to return to. But when I remembered the excitement in his eyes and the way my daughter-in-law's hand squeezed mine as if to reassure me, I decided to trust them. A few weeks later, the sale papers were signed. My son hugged me tightly and said, "You won't have to worry about anything anymore." I thought it was a new beginning. But then, things started to change. Instead of moving me into their home right away, they told me to stay temporarily in a small rental so it'd be easier to renovate the new place. The sale money, they said they had invested almost all of it. When I asked for details, they only smiled. "Trust me, Mom." Until today. My son and daughter-in-law showed up in the morning unannounced. They sat at the dining table looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. My son pushed that same canvas bag toward me. "Here's your share, Mom." No lengthy explanation, no apology, not even a flicker of remorse. I opened the bag, cold silver coins mixed with a few thin bills, as if mocking me. They clinked when I absent-mindedly stirred them with my hand, a sound that dragged me back to my late-night shifts at a fast food joint, picking up every tip to pay the electric bill. My daughter-in-law spoke this time without the softness she once had. "You don't spend much. We kept most of it to handle our future for bigger projects. This is just for you to have a little pocket money." I looked at the two of them, my heart sinking like a stone. People always say blood is thicker than water. But in that moment, I wasn't sure it still applied to my family. Memories surfaced, standing in the rain, waiting for my son after soccer practice, working extra shifts at the supermarket to buy him new shoes, paying his college tuition, without letting him know I had cut back on my own supplements. All replaying in slow motion, only to end with a bag of spare change. I knew this wasn't just a story about money. This was a story about trust. The trust I had given, fully now torn to shreds. To me, a home is not just property. It is an anchor. Without it, you can easily become a burden or be forced to live a life you never wanted. I looked at the canvas bag one more time. In that moment, I realized a bitter truth. I had handed my son and daughter-in-law the key to destroy both my present and my future, and they had done it without hesitation. The only question echoing in my mind was why. But I didn't ask. I knew no answer could change the reality sitting quietly in that bag. I remember that afternoon vividly, the afternoon when I, a mother who thought she had weathered every storm life could bring, felt like I was drowning in the cold waters of betrayal. After my son and daughter-in-law left, the canvas bag still sat crookedly on the kitchen table. I didn't dare touch it again. In my mind, one sentence kept repeating, "Here's your share, Mom." My share. From a $1 million apartment. Reduced to coins and a few small bills. I fought the urge to cry, but the tears kept threatening to fall. Not because of the money, but because of the way they had made me feel insignificant. In America, people are taught to be independent, not to rely on their children. I had lived that way all my life. But when my own child offered to take care of me, I thought I could finally set down some of my burdens. Now I understood there was no burden lifted, only the loss of what mattered most. I still had the phone number of the real estate agent who had handled the sale of my apartment. On impulse, I called him. "Ma'am, the buyer paid in full weeks ago. They paid the full million, all paperwork completed. Your son has received the money." "Why do you ask?" His voice held surprise. I thanked him and hung up my chest, burning. So the money had been in their hands all along. I decided to call my son immediately. "Son, I just spoke with the agent. He said the payment was completed. How exactly are you going to split it with me?" On the other end, his voice was cold and firm. "Mom, I've already invested all of it into a project. Trust me, in a few months it'll make a profit. The bag you have is just for you to spend for now." I asked, "What did you invest in?" His reply was short. "You don't need to worry about the details. Business is my responsibility." Before I could say anything else, my daughter-in-law cut in, her voice sweet, but as sharp as a blade. "Mom, at your age, the best thing is to let us handle everything. You don't need to trouble yourself over money matters. We'll tell you what you need to know." I bit my lip, forcing myself to stay calm. I knew that if I raised my voice now, it would only make things worse. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I remembered all those months of working 2 jobs at once just to pay off the mortgage. Those winter nights coming off a late shift, driving on icy, slippery roads just to get home, sleep a few hours, and wake up early for the morning shift. I did it all not just to have a roof over my head, but to give my son a better start in life than I ever had. And now, with just a few strokes of a pen and a handful of vague promises, the apartment was gone. The next day, I ran into Mrs. Linda, my old neighbor. She asked, "Where's your new place? I saw someone else moving into your home." I forced a smile and told her I sold the house for a change of scenery. But inside, my heart clenched. Mrs. Linda, who'd lived in America her whole life, knew the value of owning a home here. She sighed. "A home is the only thing that shields you from the outside world. Lose it, and you'll feel adrift." I nodded, but said nothing more. I didn't want anyone to know this humiliation. In the days that followed, I tried to keep in touch with my son, but every time I called, they were busy. Sometimes my son said he was in a meeting. Sometimes my daughter-in-law said she was meeting a client. My texts were met with short replies or complete silence. I began to realize something: I was no longer a priority in their lives. I was just the investor they didn't need to pay back. That sense of resentment grew inside me like a heavy stone lodged in my chest. By day, I kept up appearances, grocery shopping, cooking, making small talk with neighbors. But at night, when the city was quiet, I would lie there, restless, thinking about all that I had lost. Trust is like glass. Once it shatters, it can never be whole again. I had handed that glass to my son and daughter-in-law, and now it lay broken at my feet. One evening, I saw on social media that my daughter-in-law had posted photos from a fancy dinner in New York, a glass of red wine, a premium steak. The next day, there were pictures of them beside a brand new red sports car. I looked at those photos, my hands trembling. The money from the sale of my home was right there. I didn't even know what to feel: anger, hurt, or as if someone had reached inside and squeezed my heart. Not just because they were spending lavishly, but because they flaunted it openly as if there was nothing to hide. That night, I called my son again. Son, I saw your photos online. Did you use the house money for those things? There was a pause on the other end before he said, Don't believe everything you see on the internet. It's for business promotion. My daughter-in-law cut in, her voice no longer gentle. Mom, we know what we're doing. You just enjoy your rest. Don't make things complicated. I hung up. My heart pounded, not from sudden anger, but from the realization that I was being pushed to the sidelines. They no longer saw me as a mother to be respected, but as capital they had already used up. I knew that if I kept trusting and waiting, I would lose everything, not just money, but my self-respect. But for now, I had to stay quiet. Americans call this holding your cards close, keeping your cards hidden until you're ready to lay them down. And I decided from that moment I would start watching. Bitterness. It doesn't arrive like a sudden storm. It seeps in like a slow drizzle, soaking through every layer until the cold reaches your bones. I thought that after the day I received that bag of change, I'd be too angry to even look at them again. But no. My feelings were more like an open wound, not bleeding in a rush, but dripping slowly, drop by drop, draining me. The apartment I was renting was only about 400 square feet, one bedroom, a small living room combined with a kitchen. Every evening, when I sat with my tea by the window, I would find myself remembering my old living room, the beige sofa, the landscape painting I bought at a flea market, and a white orchid in the corner. Now all of it was just a memory. I didn't dare buy new things because this wasn't my home, and I didn't know how long I would stay here. A week after receiving that bag of money, my son and daughter-in-law invited me over for dinner. I brought an apple pie, their childhood favorite. Their house was spacious, the furnishings luxurious, the kitchen modern, everything brand new. They talked about big business plans, about meetings with potential investors, and I sat there smiling, nodding along. But somewhere in the middle of the meal, I realized this was a home partly built with the money from my apartment. Yet I felt like a stranger here. No one asked how I was doing, if I had any difficulties. They spoke about themselves, their future, as if I didn't exist in that picture at all. As I was leaving, my daughter-in-law walked me to the door and said, Drive safely, Mom. Her voice was polite, but distant. I drove back to my rented apartment, the streetlights casting a pale yellow glow on the rain-slicked road, and I found myself wondering, when did I become an outsider in my own family? The following month, I found an envelope in my mailbox. Inside was an invitation to my son's birthday party held at an upscale restaurant. What made me pause was that the card had no mom or personal note, just my bare name, like any other guest. I went to the party and sat at a table far from the center. My son and daughter-in-law were busy greeting guests, laughing with friends, hugging acquaintances. I sat quietly listening to people around me talk about real estate stocks and overseas vacations. No one asked how I got there, where I was living, or how I'd been. When the party ended, my son hugged me, but it was so brief and detached that I felt like a stranger he'd bumped into on the street. Since the day I sold my home, I'd felt a clear, invisible wall between us. Before, my son used to call me several times a week, sometimes just to ask, Have you had dinner yet? Mom? Now the phone was almost always silent. If I called, I often heard only the voicemail. Sorry, we can't take your call right now. I began to realize when you no longer have something they need, they no longer see a reason to care. One Sunday afternoon, I decided to drop by unannounced. I brought a bag of Vietnamese food, fresh spring rolls, pho, and sweet mung bean dessert. When the door opened, my daughter-in-law hesitated for a moment. Oh, Mom, I thought you'd call first. The house was cluttered with shopping bags, branded boxes still sealed with tags. I noticed a designer handbag I'd seen advertised online just last week, priced at nearly $5,000. No one asked me to stay long. They were heading out to meet friends and left me alone with the sinking feeling that I didn't belong there. The bitterness wasn't just from losing money or a home, it was from losing my place in the heart of the person I had raised. When he was little, my son used to say, "Mom, you're the person I love most in the world." Now I wonder if someone asked him that today, would he still say the same? I still live here in the same city, only 20 minutes away. And yet it feels like a distance I can't cross. I know I can't change how they treat me with just words. If I got angry, I'd be dismissed as too sensitive or not understanding business. So I choose silence. But silence doesn't mean forgetting. Bitterness for me now is no longer an explosive burst of anger, it's a quiet pain. It's there like a small thorn under the skin, not bleeding, but always reminding you it's there. If you want to know the truth, watch what they do, not what they say. I started living by that. After being brushed off by my son and daughter-in-law so many times, I realized that if I kept asking questions, all I'd get were evasive answers. So I decided not to argue anymore. I pretended to agree with everything they said, pretended to believe in the investment plans they bragged about. But inside my eyes were wide open, listening to every detail. I knew that if I wanted the truth back, I needed hard evidence. And in America, evidence is the only thing that can shut people up. I hadn't followed them closely on social media before, but now that changed. Every night I went through my daughter-in-law's Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok. They posted constantly photos of fine dining at upscale restaurants, luxury spa visits, designer watches, and handbags. Once I saw a picture of my son standing next to a yacht in Miami captioned, "Life is short, live it big." I downloaded every one of those photos, organizing them into folders on my computer. Not for revenge, but to have the clearest possible picture of what was really happening. I began finding excuses to accidentally drop by at different times. Once I said I was bringing them some Vietnamese food, but in truth I wanted to see how they lived. Their house was always filled with shopping bags, luxury brand boxes stacked in the corner of the living room. I remember seeing a watch receipt lying on the table over $12,000. That was almost an entire year's rent for my apartment. I didn't say a word. I just smiled and asked casually, "Oh, that's beautiful. Where did you get it?" My daughter-in-law replied, "A gift from a business partner, Mom." I knew it was a lie, but I nodded as if I believed her. One day I ran into Mary, an old friend from the restaurant where we used to work together. During our chat, she casually mentioned, "I saw your son and his wife in Vegas last month. They were at a big casino. I even saw them at a VIP table." I was surprised, but I kept my face neutral. I just nodded and smiled. In my mind, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I still had some paperwork from the sale of my apartment, a copy of the contract, and the account name where the payment was sent. One evening, I asked a friend who worked at a bank to guide me on how to check public transaction records in the U.S. Certain real estate-related financial records are public. I discovered that just days after receiving the house payment, a large sum had been withdrawn in multiple small transactions, a common tactic to avoid drawing attention. This confirmed that the money was not sitting in some long-term investment, as they claimed it was being spent immediately. I bought a small black notebook and kept it in my kitchen drawer. Every time I saw or heard something about how they were spending money, I wrote it down, the date, location, item, and estimated cost. For example, Feb 15, daughter-in-law posted shopping at Rodeo Drive. Hermes bag, $15,000. Feb 23, new car parked in front of their house, fresh plates. Mar 2, Mary said she saw them in Las Vegas VIP table. This notebook slowly became a diary of the truth they wanted to hide from me. Once, while at their house, I accidentally saw an open e-bill on the computer screen. My daughter-in-law walked in and caught me glancing at it. Her eyes sharpened immediately. "What are you looking at, Mom?" I smiled. "Oh, I just noticed a cute cat on the screen." She said nothing, but after that, I could feel they were becoming more cautious. I knew I had to be even more careful. The more I gathered, the more I knew I couldn't let this slide. If I exploded now, they would deny everything and I'd have nothing to prove my case. There's a saying in America, strike when the iron is hot. I was waiting for that moment. In the months that followed, I watched them live their extravagant lives without an ounce of guilt. Each new photo, each new purchase was like another small blade cutting into me. But I no longer cried. By now, my bitterness had transformed into something else, cold patience. I told myself, let them think Mom knows nothing. One day they'll realize Mom knew everything. The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. I had lived in that misery long enough. It was time to set the truth free. After months of watching, taking notes, and gathering evidence, I knew I could no longer stay silent. I had everything, screenshots from social media, shopping receipts, friends' accounts, and copies of public bank transaction records. The only question was, how to reveal it all in a way they couldn't escape. I decided to wait for a special occasion, one where not just family would be present, but also relatives and a few of their closest friends. I didn't want a public scene on social media nor a messy lawsuit. I wanted them to hear the truth with their own ears right in front of the people they most wanted to impress. The opportunity came sooner than I thought. My son called inviting me to his birthday dinner at a high-end Italian restaurant downtown. Make sure you come, Mom. There'll be a lot of people and I want you there. I smiled and agreed immediately. Inside, I knew this would be my night. The day before the party, I organized all my evidence into a neat folder. I printed the photos, clipped the documents, and even wrote down a timeline so I wouldn't forget what to say. I also brought the canvas bag, my share from the house sale, the final piece to complete the picture. The restaurant was crowded, bathed in warm golden light, the soft hum of Italian music floating through the air. My son wore a tailored suit, my daughter-in-law a striking red dress. They looked like a power couple straight out of a movie. Guests chatted, toasted, and praised their success. I sat at a table near the center, quietly observing like an audience waiting for the climax. When dessert was served, my son stood to thank everyone, his voice full of confidence. I'm so lucky to have family and friends who always support me. I promise I'll be even more successful in the future. The room erupted in applause. I clapped too, but in my head, a voice said, now. I stood and walked to my son's side. I'd like to say a few words too, I said, my voice cutting through the room until it fell silent. I turned to the guests. You know, my apartment was sold for $1 million, an apartment I spent over 30 years working in America to buy. I gave my son and daughter-in-law the authority to sell it because I trusted them, and this is what I got in return. I placed the canvas bag on the dinner table and opened it, revealing the crumpled bills and coins. The clink of metal rang out, jarring against the elegant surroundings. No one spoke. Faces shifted from curiosity to unease. I continued, I believed the money would be invested in our family's future. But here's the truth. I opened the folder and laid out the photos, them in Las Vegas, shopping in Beverly Hills, dining at Michelin star restaurants, driving a brand new sports car. Then I placed down the bank transaction copies, pointing to the large withdrawals just days after the apartment was sold. My son stood frozen, his face pale. My daughter-in-law forced a smile. Mom, this is just a misunderstanding. You don't understand how we do business. I cut her off. If this is how you do business, then I wish you luck, because I'm no longer a part of it. The air turned to ice. Some guests exchanged glances and whispered. I saw the uneasy expressions of their friends, the head shakes from a few relatives. I addressed the room. I share this not to ask for money or cause a scene. I just want you to know that trust is the most valuable thing, and once it's gone, it never comes back. I took back the canvas bag, picked up my folder, and walked out. No one stopped me. My son called after me, Mom, we can talk about this. But I didn't look back. Outside, the cool night breeze brushed my face, and I felt lighter than I had in months. I knew that from this moment on, people would see them differently. I didn't need to win in court. I only needed to win in the truth. There's a saying in America, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Tonight, that sunlight had shone into the dark corners they wanted to keep hidden. There are battles that when you win, you don't cheer. You simply sigh, look back at the battlefield, and know you've lost more than you've gained. I left that birthday party with steady steps, but a heart heavy as lead. Night had fully fallen, the streetlights casting round pools of light on the sidewalk like faded patches of memory. I drove back to my small, rented apartment, no music playing, only the hum of the engine blending with my thoughts. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No more tossing and turning over the money, no more wondering if I was being deceived. I had said everything. I had shown everyone the truth. And most importantly, I had shown myself that I was no longer the one who stayed silent and endured. There was a hint of satisfaction, I won't deny it. When I saw the bewilderment in my son's eyes, the strained smile on my daughter-in-law's face, I knew their masks had fallen. Those who once admired their success now saw the real cost of pretense. Still, that satisfaction took up only a corner of my heart. Most of it was empty space. I had once dreamed my old age would be filled with children and grandchildren gathered around me, living in the warm home I had built with my own hands. Now I lived alone in a rented apartment, unsure if I would ever own a home again. Sometimes you win the argument, but lose the relationship. I had won, but at the cost of a frayed blood tie. Neither of them reached out to me. I didn't call them either. Instead, I focused on myself. Morning yoga in the park, an Italian cooking class, and afternoons catching up with old friends. I realized that life goes on even if it's not the life you once imagined. Sometimes neighbors would ask, "How's your son doing these days?" I would simply smile, "He's busy living his own life." I didn't want to turn myself into a story for others to gossip about. One winter evening, snow fell lightly outside the window. I made a cup of hot cocoa and sat on the sofa looking out at the street. Suddenly, memories came rushing back, my son and I decorating the Christmas tree in the old apartment, his laughter as a little boy, the smell of fresh-baked cookies. Tears slid down my cheeks before I even noticed. Even though my son had disappointed me, I still missed the boy he once was, the one who held my hand crossing the street, who called Mom with excitement in his voice. The bitterest truth was realizing that boy no longer existed. I decided I wouldn't let sorrow drown me. I began researching senior benefits in America programs to help low-income seniors buy homes on installment. I opened a new savings account, putting away every small dollar I earned, money made by me for me. Independence is happiness. I wanted to finish the rest of my life in independence without anyone giving me my share ever again. 3 months later, I ran into my son at the supermarket. We stood just a few steps apart, our eyes meeting. He looked like he wanted to say something, but only nodded in greeting. I nodded back, smiling faintly, no reproach, no mention of the past. We passed each other like two old acquaintances, and I realized some wounds never heal, but you learn to live with them. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today, I walked past my son without feeling the stab in my heart like before. Maybe I've begun to forgive, not because they deserve it, but because I need peace." I closed the journal, blew out the candle, and smiled. Life hadn't given me a perfect ending, but it had given me a chance to start over in my own way. If someone asked me if I regretted exposing the truth, I would say no, because truth, however painful, is still the only antidote to lies. I looked out the window. The city lights glittered, each glowing square a separate story. In my small room, I felt both a quiet satisfaction for reclaiming my voice and a soft ache for what could never return. And I knew this was the beginning of my next chapter.